Hey there, welcome to Health Writing Wednesday. So glad that you could join this week. This week's conversation is actually going to be a continuation of the week before last conversation where we spoke about the fact that writing is a learnable skill. And so today, what I want to discuss are the three things you can start doing right now as a healthcare provider to become a better writer, in particular without needing to get another degree. Sometimes there is a tendency to think that we need another degree, another certification, another series of letters behind our names or in our titles in order to be authorized or legitimate enough to do something. And in some cases, that is absolutely true. That is the nature of the healthcare provision system, for better or for worse. Writing, in particular, health content writing, is not an example of a pathway where that is necessary, where those extra credentials are necessary. And I know sometimes it can be difficult to kind of disassociate from that notion, but today I want to talk about three strategies that are actually going to be more useful for you, more practical for you, if your goal is to build another stream of income as a freelance health content writer moving forward. So before we get into it, if you haven't had a chance to tune into one of these Health Writing Wednesdays before, my name is Megan Freeland. I'm a public health pharmacist turned health content strategist, have been a medical writer for over 10 years, a health content writer for more than 5 years at this point, and I run a program called Health Professionals to Health Writers, which is a 6-month accelerator that teaches US-based healthcare providers, pharmacists and otherwise, how to replace a portion of their income through freelance health content writing. So on Health Writing Wednesdays, we are typically focusing on freelance health content writing, which is a very specific type of medical and health writing. So I'm going to preface these 3 tips by saying becoming a better writer does not require a degree. It just does not. Now, that is not to say that there aren't that there isn't information that you need to learn in order to become a health content writer. There absolutely is, because health content writing is really a segment of health content marketing, which is a segment of digital marketing. And so there's a whole world that is helpful to understand in order to be an effective health content writer. But when we're talking about the practice of writing itself, the art and skill of writing itself, becoming a better writer does not require an additional degree or certification. It requires practice. It requires experience. It requires doing the thing that you are trying to get better at. So that involves practicing writing or practicing verbal communication skills. That can also help because those verbal communication skills are transferable to written communication. And that's part of the reason why I think that more pharmacists and healthcare providers are qualified to be health content writers, because we are verbally communicating medical and scientific information to patients every day. That is a part of our work, and that's a part of what we do. And those skills are transferable. So becoming a better writer does not require a degree or a certification. It requires practice, practicing writing skills or practicing verbal communication skills also. So the 3 suggestions that I have are going to be related to that practice, to the practice of written or verbal communication skills. And the first thing that I want to encourage you to do is to lighten up with patients. By lighten up, I mean sometimes we can feel like we need to present to a patient the same way we would present to a peer or present to an audience of peers, right? The way that we speak in a lecture hall when maybe you're presenting a CE or a grand rounds is not the way that we have to talk to patients. Take that proverbial white coat off. Take that need to feel like you are speaking in a very highly educated, highly knowledgeable way. Take the stethoscope off and just like talk to them like you would talk to a family member, or like you would talk to maybe not a friend, but maybe like a distant associate. There's this notion that, especially when it comes to Black patients and other patients of color, research has shown that when they receive care from a provider who not only looks like them, but also sounds like them, is able to sort of code switch, which I've talked about in a previous blog post, that there are better outcomes from that patient relationship. And my response to that is, okay, that's great, but why is the switch ever necessary? Why can't providers just speak to their patients in the way that they would normally speak to their patients? Would that not produce better outcomes for all patients, right? Because a part of the reason why the code switching helps is because there are cultural similarities that are more evident. The patient feels more relaxed, more comfortable, etc. But it's quite possible. I don't know that the research has been done on this, but my theory, it's quite possible that everyone could benefit from a less uptight provider interaction, that all patients could benefit from that. That maybe the white coat syndrome wouldn't be so significant for the patients who experience it if they felt like they were talking to a peer and not necessarily someone who is coming to lecture to them or to speak to them in this very like highly academic way. Maybe that's a possibility as well. So the first suggestion that I have is, with your patients, like just ease up the the stuffiness and the white coat of everything, and just communicate to them in a way that you would communicate to your family. The reason I'm suggesting that is because when it comes to health content writing, you have to not only be able to provide health education and information in like a plain language way using simple language, but you also have to do it in a way that feels conversational and approachable. And sometimes it can be difficult for a healthcare provider to make that switch if they're not used to communicating in a conversational and approachable way with their patients to begin with. So if you don't even do that verbally with your patients, then you have no experience to pull from when it's now time to do that in a written way. So that's why it can be helpful to like ease up and make the interactions that you have in person or verbally with patients more conversational, more friendly, more approachable, so that when it's time to transfer that skill to a written form of communication, you have some experience to pull from. That's suggestion number one. Suggestion number two is to practice telling stories. And by stories, that could be like analogies, examples, painting a picture with words, however you want to frame that. Practice telling stories to support the education points you're providing to your patients. So we all, especially as pharmacists, if there are any nurses who are tuning in, we all are very familiar with key patient education points when it comes to certain medications or certain treatments. I'm sure you could like list off a number of them for any given treatment. But oftentimes, in order to help a patient remember that point, in addition to providing them with some like written materials to take home with them, it can be helpful to provide a little bit more color to that patient education point with an example. And these are excellent opportunities to practice the art of storytelling within the context of healthcare. Sometimes people talk about storytelling and it can feel like, well, if I'm not in a traditionally artistic or creative field, like what use do I have for that? But really, storytelling is a part of how we communicate effectively, because when you tell a story, a person is more likely to remember that story or remember a key takeaway than they are to just remember like a minute piece of information. If you think back to the way that you studied in school, you probably created stories or like direct associations with things that were going on in your life, or connections to music or art and film in order to remember the litany of facts and information and points that you had to remember. Sometimes I will see a brand name of a medication, and to this day, I will still think of the story that I made up to be able to remember what the name of that medication was. Banzel is a perfect example, and I'm not going to tell what the story was that I created to remember it, but it's linked to a song. So practicing telling stories to support your counseling points, your patient education points, those are excellent opportunities to get used to, again, to get the experience with telling stories verbally, so that when it comes time for you to write health content in the style of health content writing, you need to pull stories. You're more able to do that because you know how it works in real life. You know how it works in verbal communication. Now you just need to take it and apply it to that written communication. So tip number 2, practice telling stories to support your patient counseling and patient education points. The last tip number 3, is to practice watering down more technical, scientific, medical concepts, specifically to younger people in your life. So if you have a child of your own, if you have nieces, nephews, if you have a friend who has children, young people in your life, if you have a neighbor with children, young people who obviously you have a relationship with, don't just, pull a child off the street and do this. This is like people that you have a personal connection with. They are speaking with them is a great way to test and hone your ability to communicate in plain language. I have a 6-year-old son and a 3-year-old daughter. She doesn't ask as many of these medical questions yet, but my son is very curious and he's always throwing questions at me when I least expect it. And I use those as opportunities to practice explaining medical concepts to him in an age appropriate way and in language that he can grasp the first time. And so when we look at the definition of plain language, which you might have heard of before, when we look at that definition, it's basically language that a person can understand the first time they see or read or hear it. They don't have to read it over again. Like, when you go to a journal article and you're reading the methods, right? Because that's where people always get tripped up. And you're like, okay, I read all of these words. I still don't know, though, what they are trying to say. Let's run that back. Let me read it again. Plain language means I understood it the first time I read it. I don't have to go back and read it to understand. I understand it the first time I see it. And so when I am explaining things to my son, I'm kind of testing myself because I'm like, okay, how can I break this down in a way that he can understand it the first time? And based on his follow-up questions, I can tell how well or poorly I did at that. Because if he basically asked me to repeat myself or says like, I don't get it, that means, all right, I didn't understand. I didn't explain it in a way that he could understand the first time. If he asks a follow-up question that is related, but indicates to me that he understood what I said, that's a good thing. That means that I explained it well the first time, and now he wants more details. He always has follow-up questions. So it's a great exercise. It's a great practice exercise. I have a former student who came through the Health Professionals to Health Writers program, I think last year, and she uses her children, or not uses her children, but she speaks with her children when she is writing for clients. She will read what she has written to them and use that to gauge how clear her writing is. So they are able to kind of give feedback or be like, well, I don't get this part, or, maybe there's a gap here. And they're able to help her identify whether she has explained something clearly enough or not, or whether there are gaps or not, etc. And I thought that was a genius idea because it's a different way of it's like similar to what I do, but a little bit different, but still leveraging the knowledge level of young people to determine whether the writing you are creating is simple enough or could use some work. So those are the 3 tips that I have for you. If you are wanting to become a better writer, understanding that you're going to need to and have to practice, the 3 ways that you can start practicing, because not all practicing means you have to be writing all the time. The 3 ways that you can start practicing are to loosen up, lighten up with your patients, make your conversations with them more conversational, more approachable. Second, practice telling stories to your patients to support whether it's counseling points or education. And then third, practice watering down medical concepts to the young people in your life. Or if you have like older folks in your life, that could also be an audience for you as well. So in the comments, I want you to let me know which one of these you are going to start trying today, like Wednesday, February 22nd, 2023, when this is being broadcast to you. Let me know which of these strategies you're going to try, or if it's after then, you can also let me know. And if you have any interest in being notified when the next cohort of health professionals to health writers opens for enrollment, please leave the word waitlist in the comments. The next cohort begins in July 2023, and enrollment will start in March. That is next month. If you have been around for a while, you know that only folks who are on the wait list are eligible for enrollment in the very beginning. And oftentimes the cohort does fill up from the wait list. So please make sure that you leave a comment just with the word wait list if you're interested in potentially applying for the next cohort of health professionals to health writers. And I'll see y'all